Today, I'm directing the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, to notify the UN Security Council that the United States intends to restore virtually all of the previously suspended United Nations sanctions on Iran. It's a snapback.
All right, that was President Trump yesterday taking a tough stance on Iran after the UN Security Council rejected a U.S. resolution to extend an arms embargo on the #1 state sponsor of terrorism. Meanwhile, Iran today unveiled 2 missiles they named after terrorists who murdered American service members in Baghdad. Well, joining us now is former State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert. Heather, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Lindsay. Great to see you. Hi, Sean.
All right, well, we saw Secretary of State Mark Pompeo start a process to snap back these sanctions that were essentially erased by the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. If this is successful, what does this mean?
Yeah, so first of all, the reason why we're instituting these snapback sanctions is frankly that Iran, the United States believes, and so do some of our allies and partners, that Iran has not been in compliance with some key components of the nuclear deal. For example, some of our allies, France, Germany, and the UK, in January said that Iran is not in compliance, yet they failed to do anything about it. So the United States takes a very realistic approach to Iran. We have said Iran is not in compliance. They continue to fire off ballistic missiles and test them. Some debate whether or not that is allowed, but it's certainly not allowed under the spirit of the original agreement. There are people who go in to try to inspect testing sites and other places like that Iran frankly won't allow in. So the United States and President Trump has said enough is enough. Let's deal with the Iran that we actually know as they exist, the leading state sponsor of terror, and not be ignorant to it and not turn a blind eye. And so that's exactly what the administration is doing. Now, to your question, what will snapback sanctions mean? It will mean, and it's really a no-brainer, that Iran will not be allowed to purchase certain types of weapons and material, fighter jets, for example, tanks. Who on earth wants the leading state sponsor of terror to have more of those materials? Well, frankly, Russia and China want them to be able to do it because they want those big lucrative arms deals. We don't want that. It's far too dangerous.
You mentioned our allies, England and France. Are they with us on this?
Well, see, the vote last week at the United Nations, it failed. And I think we have some of our allies that are frankly thinking about who's going to win the election. Some, I think, are trying to hedge their bets that Joe Biden could potentially win the election. This is weak on their part. They know better. You know, our European allies and the United States worked together to help thwart assassination attempts conducted by the Iranians on European soil in major cities. So they have access to the same intel we do, but we're standing up and the president's standing up and being strong on this. Now, one concern—
Didn't you think that was odd, Heather? I mean, I don't follow the UN like you do, and you did, but it seemed odd to me that this Security Council vote goes down against the U.S. in favor of Iran, and the people who are leading the charge to not join us are our supposed allies that are equally threatened. This wasn't led by Russia and China. I mean, the opposition, we've got European countries that were against us.
And I think there are a couple things at play here. It's some pushback on President Trump because sadly, some of these European allies just frankly don't like to work with this president. They see him as having been bombastic. They see the same intel we do, so they know what a threat Iran is. But there's another motivation here for some of these European allies, and that is they like to be able to sell goods and services to the Iranian regime. It's greed. Part of it is motivated by pure greed, and it's silly and it's ridiculous for them to do it, and frankly, it's dangerous.
You know, you mentioned also that Russia and China didn't want these sanctions. We saw just today that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny said that he was poisoned. This is what a spokesperson said about the situation. A year ago, he was poisoned in a prison, and I'm sure the same thing happened here. It's different symptoms and obviously a different toxin, but obviously this was done to him intentionally. You know, what does it say in election year when we have Russia who just openly does something like this? Should we have concern for them and how potentially a Biden presidency would look with our relationship with Russia?
Sure. If he was poisoned, and we don't know that for a fact yet, but this is straight out of Vladimir Putin's playbook. This isn't the Russian people going after the opposition leader. It's rather the government. And they do this for people who stand up and speak out against Vladimir Putin and some of his goons. This has happened before. Remember in the UK with the former spy and his daughter in the Skripal attacks. First time chemical weapons have been used on European soil since, I believe it was World War II. So that was significant. But the world has failed to stand up and really do anything about that chemical weapons use on European soil when that happened, about a year or two, about 2 years or so ago. So it would not surprise me if that's exactly what happened to this opposition leader. If you speak out against the Putin regime, look out. And the United States needs to do as much as it can to try to support these voices of freedom in countries like Russia.
It was so brazen. I mean, they did it on English soil. Now they do it again. It's almost like they're like, yeah, what are you going to do about it? Heather, I want to turn the page just a moment. The Iraqi prime minister was at the White House today. How big of a deal is it in terms of our relationship? President Trump was big on pulling out all the troops and talked about Iraq being a mistake in terms of U.S. intervention. Now you have him and the prime minister sitting down and talking about the way forward. How big of a deal is that?
Yeah, it's significant for the new prime minister, who's a close friend of the United States. We like this guy. We want to see him succeed. And so far, he is succeeding. However, there remain significant concerns with Iranian-backed militias in Iraq. And there are some in Iraq that are far too close to Iran. So what the United States needs to do is create a strongest relationship as we can with Iraq to push back on Iran. And one of the ways that we can do that are through oil and gas deals, for example, where Iraq can become self-sufficient and not have to buy supplies and material from a place like Iran. So that's one of the things that we'll be looking for. We've got to be very careful about those militias. Remember, it was about 2 years ago that the U.S. had to close off its consulate in southern Iraq because Iran was coming after our people, our personnel there, and our consulate, firing rockets, trying to kill us. So we actually had to remove our staff while I was there at the State Department from that consulate. That is why the Iranian threat is so significant. They don't just try to hit us there overseas. They try to do it all around the world.
Heather, it's so good to see you. Thanks for giving us insight into these snapbacks. We'll have to have you back as we see these stories develop.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks a lot.
All right, well, Sean and I will be right back with our take on some of today's top stories.